I was sitting at my desk this morning, just looking at the stack of research we have for today's deep dive, and a thought occurred to me. We spend so much of our lives relying on things we just can't see. Think about your daily routine. You check your bank balance on your phone, you send an email to a colleague, maybe you make a video call to a grandchild overseas. We do this constantly. And if you ask most people where all that information actually lives or how it gets from point A to point B, they usually look up.
That's right, they point to the sky.
Exactly. We have this mental image of the cloud. We think of satellites, we think of signals just zipping through the air, almost like magic. It feels abstract. But the documents we're breaking down today, they tell a very different story. They tell us that this mental image isn't just slightly off, it's completely wrong.
It's entirely the opposite of reality.
Yeah.
We're not talking about data floating in the ether. We're talking about a physical, heavy, industrial machine that is sitting at the bottom of the ocean.
And that machine is effectively holding up the entire modern world.
That's it.
That is exactly what we are here to discuss. Welcome to Between the Lines. I am your host. On this channel, our goal is to slow things down. We want to step back from the noise of the daily news cycle and ask a simple, fundamental question. What is actually holding our global system together? Today, we're going to look at that invisible network of undersea cables that powers the global economy. We're going to look at how they work, why they're vulnerable, and why security analysts are quietly calling this the new front line of modern conflict.
It's a subject that it really forces you to look at a map in a completely different way.
It certainly does. Before we dive into the details, I want to take just a brief moment to thank you for being here with us. If you appreciate this kind of calm, careful, independent analysis, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to Between the Lines. It genuinely helps us keep the lights on and continue this research.
It does. It allows us to take the time to really explore these complex topics properly.
So let's get into the sources. We have a collection of reports here covering infrastructure engineering, geopolitical strategy, maritime law. And the first thing we need to address is that misconception I mentioned at the start. I think many listeners, myself included, until I read this, assume that if the cables on the ocean floor break, we just, switch to satellites, like a plan B.
Right, and that's the first myth we have to dispel. Satellites are amazing technology, certainly. They are crucial for things like the global positioning system or for reaching very remote areas. But in terms of the heavy lifting of the global internet, they're a rounding error.
A rounding error.
Yes. We're talking about roughly 95 to, 99% of all international data traffic moving through fiber optic cables on the seabed.
99%, that's a staggering number.
It is. Think about financial transactions, military orders, diplomatic cables, your streaming services, your phone calls. It's all down there. Satellites simply cannot handle that volume or that speed. The physics just don't allow for it. So we have to be very clear. These cables are not a backup system.
They are the system.
They are the system.
That's a wild realization. We tend to think of the digital age as being wireless, but in reality, we're tethered. So let's strip away the mystery for a moment. When we say undersea cable, what are we actually looking at? Because when I hear that, I picture these massive sewer pipe-sized conduits if they're carrying the entire internet.
You would think so, wouldn't you, given the importance? But that is the surprise. If you were to hold one of these cables in your hand, it's about the width of a garden hose.
A garden hose.
Maybe the thickness of a soda can at the absolute thickest points near the shore where they need extra armor. But that's it.
That's it.
And inside that garden hose, the actual business end, the fiber optic strands carrying the data, they're incredibly thin, about the thickness of a human hair.
So just to help us visualize this, we have hair-thin glass strands sitting at the bottom of the deepest oceans under crushing pressure and salt water, carrying trillions of dollars of economic activity every day.
Precisely. It really is an engineering marvel. Those glass fibers are wrapped in layers to protect them. You have a layer of petroleum jelly, then steel shielding for strength, copper to carry the electrical power to the repeaters, and then finally a plastic insulation. It's armor, essentially. But even with all that armor, physics is physics. It's still just a cable.
This brings up an analogy from one of the source documents that I found really helpful. They called it the garden hose theory.
Right. It's the perfect way to visualize it. Think of the internet not as a web floating above us, but as a series of very, very long hoses connecting continents. Everything flows through them. And just like a garden hose in your backyard, if you pinch it, if you kink it, or if you cut
The
it,
flow stops
immediately.
immediately. And because it's physical, it plays by physical rules. I think we forget this. We're so used to things being instant. But light actually takes time to travel through that glass, doesn't it?
It does. Exactly. It's incredibly fast, but it's not teleportation. There's travel time. We call this latency. And this is where the engineering meets the economics, because that physical distance, it really matters.
Okay, let's pull on that thread, the timing aspect, because the sources made a big deal about this, and I want to make sure we don't gloss over it. Why does it matter? I mean, if a cable gets damaged and my email takes an extra 2 seconds to send, is that really a global crisis?
For you and me, sending a personal email, no. We might get annoyed that a video is buffering, sure. But for the systems that run the global economy, that garden hose pinch is catastrophic. We're not just talking about emails, we're talking about high-frequency trading, global logistics chains, cloud server synchronization.
Could you give us a concrete example of how that works?
Certainly. Let's look at financial markets. You have algorithms trading stocks in microseconds based on price differences between London, New York, and Tokyo. These systems rely on data arriving at a very precise moment. If the data from London arrives 3 milliseconds later than expected because it had to be rerouted through a different, longer cable,
The math breaks.
the math breaks, the synchronization is gone, the entire model falls apart. It's not that the internet explodes in some Hollywood fireball, it's that the rhythm of the system collapses.
I like that word, rhythm. It suggests that the problem is less about a total blackout and more about friction.
Yes, that is the key concept here, friction. It's a loss of stability. Modern systems are designed for seamless, predictable flow. When you introduce unpredictability, when the hose gets kinked, you introduce friction. And in a global economy, friction costs billions of dollars.
So we have established that the system is physical, it is surprisingly small garden hose size, and it is absolutely critical for the rhythm of the global economy. Now we have to talk about the part that the security analysts are worried about, vulnerability.
Right. This is the core of the issue.
If these things are just sitting on the ocean floor, often thousands of miles from land, what's protecting them?
In a word, obscurity. The ocean is vast. That's the main defense. We rely on the fact that the ocean is big and deep, but the sources highlight that they're not as safe as we would like to believe. In fact, cable faults happen quite often.
But those are usually accidents, correct?
Historically, yes. About 2/3 of all cable damage is caused by innocent human activity. You have fishing trawlers dragging heavy nets along the bottom, or ships dropping anchor in the wrong spot during a storm. Or you have natural disasters, undersea landslides, or earthquakes that just snap the lines.
Okay, so those are things we can understand. They're not malicious. They're just part of operating in the real world.
Yeah.
And we have repair chips to fix them.
We do. But here's the pivot point in the research. That same physical vulnerability that makes them susceptible to a phishing net.
Makes them susceptible to sabotage.
Exactly. And this is where the conversation shifts from engineering to what we might call strategic competition.
The sources kept using a specific term, the gray zone.
Yes, the gray zone.
Sounds like something from a spy novel, but it seems to be a very serious concept. Can we define that clearly for the listener?
It's a very real military and diplomatic concept. The gray zone refers to aggressive actions that fall below the threshold of open war. It's not peace, but it's not shooting missiles at each other either.
So, to use a clear comparison, if a country bombs a power plant, that is an act of war.
Right. That's visible. It triggers a military response. Tanks roll out. Alliances like the North Atlantic Treaty Organization might be activated. But what if a cable deep in the Atlantic just stops working?
You assume it's a trawler. You assume it's a rock slide.
Exactly. And proving otherwise is a nightmare. The ocean floor is the perfect crime scene. It's dark, it's deep, the pressure is immense, and there are no security cameras down there.
Attribution. That's the problem.
Attribution, figuring out who did it, is nearly impossible in real time. You might know the cable was cut. You might see a ship in the vicinity on satellite tracking. But can you prove they dragged an anchor on purpose? Can you prove it wasn't a mechanical failure on their ship?
And while you're arguing about proof, the damage is already done. The hose is pinched.
Precisely. This is what the analysts call pressure without fingerprints. You can hurt a rival country's economy, disrupt their military communications, and sow chaos in their government, all without ever firing a shot or admitting you did anything.
It's weaponized uncertainty.
That is a great way to put it. The goal is not necessarily to destroy the internet totally. The goal is to create ambiguity. If a country cannot trust its own connection to the world, if they don't know if the outage is a glitch or an attack, They become hesitant. They lose confidence.
And that hesitation is leverage.
Huge leverage. In a crisis, if you're unsure if your orders are getting through to your fleet or if your banks can communicate with the central bank, you act differently. You act more cautiously.
I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about the map. Because when we look at a standard map on the wall, we see borders, we see land masses. But the map of these cables, the map of the physical internet, does not look like that, does it?
No, not at all. And this is the part that I think is most critical to understand. The internet has a geography. These cables don't just run randomly across the ocean floor like spaghetti. They follow very specific paths.
Why is that? Is it just the shortest distance between 2 points?
Partly. But it's mostly about geology and, well, politics. You have to avoid underwater volcanoes, deep trenches, coral reefs. You want to land the cables in countries with stable governments and good power grids. So what happens is you get these massive clusters.
Like highways?
Exactly like highways. And just like highways, they have choke points. The sources point out areas like the Red Sea, the Strait of Malacca, the Luzon Strait, and the approaches to major hubs like New York and Cornwall in the United Kingdom.
So you have trillions of dollars of data forcing its way through these tiny geographic corridors.
Right. And that creates a massive strategic risk. We used to think of choke points in terms of oil tankers. We would ask, can a ship get through the Suez Canal? But now, the choke point is digital.
If you control the water above the cable, do you control the data?
In a way, yes. Or at least you hold the ability to sever it. If you look at the Red Sea right now, it's a prime example. A huge percentage of the connectivity between Europe and Asia runs through that narrow strip of water. If that corridor becomes a conflict zone, which it is, those cables are sitting ducks.
It really forces us to rethink what power looks like in the 21st century. I grew up, and I think many of our listeners did too, thinking power was aircraft carriers. It was nuclear silos. It was visible.
That is the traditional view. And don't get me wrong, aircraft carriers are still powerful. But modern power is often quiet. It's about infrastructure. It's about timing. It's about controlling the flow.
It's the difference between a sledgehammer and a scalpel.
Or perhaps a sledgehammer and a tourniquet. You are cutting off the blood flow. And the concerning thing about this invisible war is that it's happening right now, and most of us don't even interpret it as conflict.
We interpret it as a glitch.
Right. A cloud service goes down for an hour. A banking app stops working. We complain on social media. We don't stop to think, was this a geopolitical maneuver?
But maybe we should.
Maybe we should. Because if trust in the system erodes, behavior changes. Yeah. Companies start moving data centers. Governments start building their own private cables. The global internet, this open shared thing we've enjoyed, starts to fracture.
The sources mention a term for this, the splinternet.
Yes, the splinternet. It's the idea that the internet splits into separate, disconnected networks. It's already happening to some degree. You're seeing nations try to route cables only through friendly waters. The map is being redrawn based on alliances, not just efficiency.
That is a sobering thought. The physical geography of the ocean floor is dictating the future of international relations.
It always has. We just forgot about it for a while because the technology works so well. We got complacent. We assumed the connection would always be there.
So let's wrap this up and synthesize what we've learned for the listener. The internet is not a cloud. It is a garden hose at the bottom of the sea. It is physically fragile. It is concentrated in dangerous bottlenecks. And it is the perfect venue for a new kind of war one that relies on uncertainty and gray zone tactics.
That is the summary. We have built our entire civilization on a foundation of glass strands that are incredibly difficult to defend.
It certainly makes you think twice the next time you see that loading icon spinning on your screen.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
It reminds us that everything we do online has a physical cost and a physical risk.
You know, there's one thing we touched on but didn't fully explore. We mentioned those choke points, the Red Sea, the Straits, the places where all the cables bunch up.
The bottleneck problem.
Exactly. If the strategy of this invisible war is to apply pressure, those bottlenecks are the pressure points. What happens when the tension in those specific spots gets too high?
That is when geography stops being background scenery and starts driving the conflict. When you have that much value passing through such a small space, the temptation to interfere becomes very high.
And that is exactly where we're going in the next deep dive. We're going to zoom in on those specific, quiet choke points, the narrow places where global power, infrastructure, and geography are all colliding. We want to understand the specific risks in those corridors.
It's going to be a crucial discussion.
I cannot wait. Thank you for listening to Between the Lines. If this conversation sparked something for you, or if it changed how you see the world just a little bit, please share it with a friend who thinks the internet lives in the sky. We appreciate your time and your curiosity.
Until next time.